Hello everyone and welcome back to Creation Myths. Today we are going to tackle a short video from Answers in Genesis, and not even the whole thing, but most of this little clip because it was so obvious in its lies. When I watched it, I said, this needs a response. So the clip I'm about to show you is from a 19-minute video called Check This Out, which you can get for just $12.99 on DVD or $7.99 for the digital download from Answers in Genesis. The clip I'm going to show you is featured on the main answersingenesis.org/evolution page. So they are making this like a mainstay of their coverage of evolution. And that page is linked down below if you want to see this complete clip in context. So let's watch this and then we'll talk about it.
You hear this one a lot. Science has proven evolution, therefore evolution is true. Since evolution is true and Christians don't believe it, then Christians don't believe science and they aren't rational people. Really, let's put that claim to the test. First off, evolution in the sense that things change is evident. No rational person disputes that. Therefore, rational Christians believe it. We can observe change, but evolution in the sense that life came from non-life and then that life began to randomly generate new genetic information and over time it eventually produced humans is something entirely different and something that quite honestly doesn't hold up against science. In other words, evolution in the sense of molecules to man is not scientifically plausible and therefore should not be viewed as scientific fact. Quite honestly, it is in great opposition to science, that is, observational science, the kind of science we can test and repeat and use our five senses to understand. Science demonstrates that over time, living organisms lose genetic information. They don't gain it. That same science demonstrates that life doesn't arise from non-life. Follow along if you would. Fact 1. There is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. That pretty much refutes evolution right away because there's no way to go from a fish to an amphibian without adding new information, right? If living organisms cannot produce new genetic information, how can anything gradually change into something of higher intelligence or form or complexity? That is, how can anything evolve from an amoeba to a man without adding new genetic information? The answer, of course, is that it can't. Plain and simple. Now, some have speculated and they have imagined all kinds of things and they brought in artists to produce creative renderings based on guesses, and they have been successful in telling a very convincing story that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But those are just drawings, people. They're just stories. But what we really observe is humans are humans and apes are apes.
Okay, so as you can see, it's got the usual, AIG productions, well made, of course, but I want to be extremely clear about how blatant the lie is here. The narrator in this video says two things that I want to quote specifically. First, they say, over time, living organisms lose genetic information, they don't gain it. And then a little bit later, they say, fact 1, there is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. They say in order to get new traits or new complexity, you need new information, and that not only hasn't been observed, but it can't be observed. They go into their observational science thing, which is wrong, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, so I'm not going to worry about that here. That's been talked about plenty elsewhere. I want to focus on this claim about new information, because even by the standards of Answers in Genesis, it is astonishingly dishonest. Here is a short and incomplete list of new traits that require new genetic information that we've directly observed. You've got multicellularity in Chlamydomonas, a green algae with no multicellularity in its evolutionary history. You have not just live birth, but the appearance of placentas in lizards, including finding living populations transitioning from egg-laying to live birth. Unless they're postulating that each species was a separately created kind, which Answers in Genesis explicitly rejects, there's new information at play there. There's primary endosymbiosis in an amoeboid rhizarian called Pollinella chromatophora happening right now. We're watching a new type of chloroplast evolve in real time. There's secondary endosymbiosis happening in a bunch of different animals, but most importantly a nudibranch called Elysia chlorotica, because that example involves the transfer of one of the genes needed for photosynthesis from the new organelle to the animal genome, and then the trafficking of that protein back from the animal genome through the animal ribosomes back into the newly forming organelle, along with all of the underlying new regulatory and transport mechanisms that are needed to accomplish that. That's clearly new information. We also have, of course, a completely new antifreeze protein in Arctic fish. We have the ability to digest nylon, a synthetic fiber, evolving in bacteria. We have a protein in HIV called VPU that acquired a completely new function compared to its simian immunodeficiency virus ancestor that allows HIV to evade a part of the human immune system that's different from the same mechanism in chimpanzees. And that protein didn't lose its old function when it acquired the new function. In HIV, it now does both. These are all directly observed examples of new information and new complex traits. I wrote this list off the top of my head. Play a game in the comments. What other examples can you think of? Because there are a lot more out there, and I bet a bunch of y'all can list them down in the comments. Now, one problem for creationists is that they make sweeping claims about information, but don't or can't define information. I've talked about this at some length, and it came up in my conversation last year with Paul Price. But by any reasonable definition, even something as common as a gene duplication is an increase in genomic information. The problem for creationists here, the big overarching problem, is they can't even admit something as simple as a gene duplication is an increase in information. Because if they do, they're forced to admit how trivially easy it is to add new genetic information. Once they admit that evolutionary processes can accomplish information gains, that's the ball game. There's no barrier to how much information you could add once you open that door. Every creationist attempt to define that limit, for example, irreducible complexity or the waiting time problem, fails. I've covered those in detail in other videos. Other channels have covered those in details. I'll try to remember to link some of those videos down below. But my point is, once that snowball starts rolling, an amoeba evolving into a man, to use a flawed example from the video, it isn't just possible, it's inevitable. And I want to emphasize, somebody at Answers in Genesis knows that. Probably not Ken Ham, because he frankly doesn't care about the science stuff and doesn't really understand it. But it's possible. He's been doing this for so long, maybe he does. But I want to just make sure we're all clear here. They're not just wrong about this. They are lying. Keep that in mind anytime you encounter anything from Answers in Genesis. This is a particularly blatant example, but it's just one of the countless lies they tell. Thank you for watching. Please remember to hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and consider becoming a channel member. When you do that, you get immediate access to pre-recorded videos like this once I upload them, instead of having to wait for the public release date. Thank you to all my current channel members. As always, don't get fooled.